Okay team, welcome back to the studio, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to go on, just excuse me while I refer to my notes, there's a fair bit to go through to cover in this episode. But today we're going to go on with basically what effect tyre pressures have in different conditions and different factors that you need to take into account when you're adjusting your tyre pressures. And a few little things you probably haven't heard from any other channels before that we're going to cover. And yeah, so if you find the content helpful, do me a favour, click the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hopefully you'll notice that we've tried a different mic this week, and yeah, like this one's a lot better than the last one, so it should work a lot better. Okay, so in this video what we're going to do is we're going to cover things that affect tyre performance, what the effect has of raising your tyre pressure, the effect of lowering your tyre pressures, and how I choose my tyre pressures in different conditions and different circumstances.
Now, things that affect tyre performance. Now, we all like to sit around the campfire and discuss tyres, and we all think we know or have our own opinions about tyres, but the fact is, even a Formula One engineer would tell you that tyre pressures and tyre performance are one of the most least understood things when it comes to vehicle performance. And that's simply because there's just so many variables and changing conditions that are occurring constantly. And the fact is, the only way to get the most out of your tyres is actually to get out there and start testing different pressures in different conditions and seeing how the vehicle reacts. Now, I'll quickly smash through these, but here's the different conditions that affect tyre performance. First one is road surface. Now, generally speaking, a hard road surface like bitumen or a hard dirt road is going to provide a lot less rolling resistance than a soft surface like soft sand on the beach. The next one is tyre construction. A light single ply tyre is going to react completely different compared to a thick 3-ply off-road tyre. Likewise, the effect of lowering or raising your tyre pressure is also going to be equally different. And that's because the heavier the tyre and the thicker and stronger construction, the more load on the vehicle is going to be taken up by the construction of the tyre as opposed to the air in the tyre. Now, what that means is, all other things being equal, you'll have to let a lot more air out of a heavily constructed tyre to achieve the same level of deflection. Now, the next one is the weather and the road surface temperature. Now, as those ambient temperatures go up, the ability for the tyre to dissipate heat is going to reduce. So the longer and faster you drive, the more difference in tyre pressure you'll have. And you'll find that when you start driving, the tyre pressures will actually go up, and they'll go up faster as the vehicle speed increases as well. Usually no more than a few PSI. Now, another important factor is the vehicle weight. Now, generally speaking, you may want to run slightly higher tyre pressures to accommodate the extra load and extra weight of the vehicle. And the final big one is, what's the actual condition of the tyre? And I'm not so much referring to the amount of tread left on the tyre, but actually the age of the tyre and the condition of the rubber. How badly is the rubber perished? Now, in my experience, an old perished tyre has an inability to deal with lower tyre pressures at any kind of speed. It can very easily crack apart and the tyre be destroyed. And you see this particularly on trailers that tend to sit around the yard a lot, not get used, and the tyres are on the vehicle or on the trailer for quite a long time. And then when they do get used, you see them tearing apart and falling apart on the roads.
Okay, so while we're out here, we've got the tyres up to normal road pressures. We'll talk about why, all the effects of having high tyre pressures in your tyre. So, again, I'm just referring to my notes here. It's quite extensive, this stuff. Okay, so on hard surfaces, you're going to have less rolling resistance. However, on softer surfaces, you're going to have more rolling resistance. Okay, and that's because being that the tyre is high in pressure, you're going to have an increased ground pressure, and it's going to tend to penetrate into those softer surfaces, causing more rolling resistance. You're going to have less tyre flex. Now, you can see here, in terms of the bulge between the top of the tyre or the sidewall here and the sidewall at the bottom, there's not too much difference. When we lower the tyre pressures, you'll see a massive difference in how much bulge there is from the sidewalls. Now, as the tyre rotates, because there's not too much bulge, there's not too much flex in the tyre, and there won't be too much heat build up either. As you can imagine, it's like getting a piece of rubber and moving around. That movement's going to cause heat, Same with the tyre. So less or more air means less flex in the tyre, which means less heat buildup. Okay, generally speaking, you'll have more load carrying capacity with a tyre that's got more air in it. You can imagine a smaller vehicle, like a small car, will have less pressure in the tyres to accommodate the weight, but a really heavy vehicle like a truck will have a lot more air in the tyres to accommodate for that massive or that increased load. Now, generally speaking, you're going to have less grip with higher tyre pressures. Now, that's because the contact patch in the ground is going to be slightly smaller. So as you go lower in pressure, that contact patch increases and the grip increases. As you go up in pressure, the contact patch reduces and the grip reduces. Now that's also, bear in mind that also has to do with the amount of weight that's being pushed onto that wheel from the vehicle itself. So that's a bit of a sliding scale there. More air in the tyre, you can have more steering response on hard surfaces, less steering response on soft surfaces like sand. You're going to have a firmer ride. That's going to be quite evident, especially when you start hitting some harder roads or rougher roads. More air you've got on the tyres, more rough the ride's going to feel. It's going to be more uncomfortable, and it's going to start bouncing around and making the ride just generally uncomfortable. I touched on it a moment ago, but with higher tyre pressures, you'll have a higher ground pressure. Now I'll talk a bit more about ground pressures later on in the video, as it doesn't get talked about too much, but when we talk about it a bit later in the video, you'll see how important ground pressure is when it comes to your ability to negotiate different types of terrain and things like that. You'll have less puncture resistance. Now, if you think of a balloon, when that's fully inflated, it's very easy to pop, but when it's only inflated just a little bit, it's hard to pop, or harder to pop. So same thing goes with the tyres. More air in it, the more likely sharp rocks or sharp sticks are likely to penetrate the tyre itself and cause a puncture. So what we'll do is we'll head home. We're going to let the air out of the tyres, and you're going to see the effect that letting the air out makes. We're going to do it on the driveway home because of the consistency of the concrete. And I just want to show you some of the effects of the ground pressure and the difference that makes. Okay, so I know I said I was going to do this back in the driveway at home, but I thought I'd come out here. There's a bit more room out to do it out here, but we chose a nice level flat surface, nice hard flat surface. And what we're going to do is we're going to measure the difference in the change in contact patch as we lower the tyre pressures before we discuss about the other overall effects that lowering pressures has. So we've got these two highly scientific rulers here and a tape measure. What we're going to do is we're going to measure the contact patch just by sticking the rulers up against the tyre like that. And then we're going to take a measurement and that's giving us a measurement of 250 mil on the front. On the rear we've got 240 mil. So now the front and rear tyre pressures are equal, and I'll discuss the reasons why I run my tyre pressures equal, front and rear, but that gives me an indication that the weight distribution of the vehicle is almost equal. So with a little bit of extra weight over the front of the vehicle, probably mostly due to the engine, but that's the way I actually prefer it. It helps a little bit with vehicle dynamics. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just let the tyres down to 10 psi, and you should see quite clearly the difference in tyre deflection, which is like the way the tyre moulds around the terrain it's on. In this case, the bitumen. You'll see the sidewall of the tyre bulge out a little bit as the air is released out of it. Now I use this Max-Trax Indeflate. It just makes the job a little bit easier. But one thing it does do is it doesn't really make it faster, but we'll leave our hose out for a bit later. But what it means is that you can inflate and deflate two tyres at once. And what it also does is it equalises the pressure between two tyres that you're adjusting in pressure. So we're going to adjust the tyres on the left hand side here. So we can connect that one up. Right, and what we're going to do is we're going to let the tyres down. Now they'll deflate evenly, but we're going to let them down to 10 psi. Okay, so that's 10 psi. Now we'll do that measurement again. The front is now 340 mil, so that's an increase of about 100 mil. Again, 350 mil, so again, increase about 100 mil. Okay, so with the tyres down to 10 psi, you can see not only is the contact patch increased, there's a much more obvious significant bulge and flex in the lower part of the tyre here that's bulging out. Now, one thing to remember is that because they're a radial constructed tyre, it'll only be essentially the contact patch length that will increase, not the width, and that's because of the construction of the tyre. It'll only be the tread pattern on the outside that'll be touching the ground. It won't be any sidewall. That's just the construction of the tyre that allows that to happen. What you want is good track length, not width, because the width is going to increase your rolling resistance. All right, so let's discuss the effects that lowering your tyre pressure has. So we'll follow the same structure as we did with the raising your tyre pressures did. Okay, so with rolling resistance on soft terrain, you're going to have less resistance with lower tyre pressures, but on harder terrain like bitumen like this, it's going to be more rolling resistance. You'll have more flex in the tyre, and as you can see, that's demonstrated by the difference in the sidewall on the upper part of the tyre and the lower part of the tyre. As the tyre spins, that's going to constantly flex as it goes, or weight's placed on that part of the tyre. You can imagine if you're doing 100 kilometres an hour at 10 psi, there's going to be significant difference in all that flex, and there's going to be big build up in heat. Okay, with a lower tyre pressure, you're going to have less load carrying capacity. More load again is going to increase more flex. More flex means more heat, and that's going to go up exponentially as you increase speed. More contact patch with the lower pressures is going to mean more grip, generally speaking. Just while on that may not be the case in the rain. So when I used to race, we used to actually over-pressurise our tyres a little bit just to help cut through the water. I haven't seen any data in terms of off-road tyres or on the road whether it makes a big difference, but you know, it's going to have to do with the design of the tyre. You're going to have less response in the steering due to more flex in the tyre, and also less response to acceleration and brake. So that when you've got to remember that response is different to grip. So you may have more grip but less response. You're going to have a obviously softer ride with less tyre pressure. And you'll notice a massive difference in comfort when you're on a rough road at speed with less tyre pressure. You'll find a bit less tyre pressure is going to smooth it right out a bit, make it a bit more supple and a bit easier to drive on. Right, we touched on it before. Ground pressure. Okay, so we're just out here at our local long jump track. I'm just going to be a demonstration of why ground pressure is so important and how it sort of actually applies to things. So what we've got here is it's just a regular tent peg, and I'm going to show you how the distribution of weight is going to affect how much ground pressure it is. Right, so what we've got here is our sand, right, nice soft sand. So we'll just smooth that out so it's nice and flat. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop this peg from the same height, so vertically like this. I'm going to drop it straight to the ground with a straight arm, and we'll see how much it digs in. All right. Right, as you can see, it's dug in. Well, let's take it straight out. So it's dug in by about probably 9 centimetres or so. Right, now what we're going to do is we're going to drop it to the ground flat like this, and then measure how much it sinks into the ground. So it obviously weighs the same regardless of what direction it's sitting, but let's see how much it penetrates into the ground laying flat. Alright, so it hasn't penetrated in hardly at all, so maybe a centimetre, if that. And that's why that having the weight spread out over a larger surface area is going to reduce your ground pressure and give you more flotation, and in case of a tyre, it's going to give you more grip. Okay, if you're still not convinced, here's a chart I pulled off the internet, and it's an example of ground pressures. As you can see, the Abrams tanks, we can expect to weigh probably about 60 to 70 tonnes as a ground pressure of 15 psi. It was a 1993 Toyota 4Runner, which probably weighs probably under 2 tonnes, a ground pressure of 25 psi. Now, that obviously the tank has large tracks to accommodate the weight, it's spread out, lower ground pressure. So obviously, because as you saw with the demonstration with the sand, you're going to have the weight of the vehicle is going to be spread out over a more contact patch on the tyre, and you're going to end up with less ground pressure as the air pressure comes down in the tyres. Now, I have heard, and I don't know if it's actually correct or not, that the ground pressure will be equal to the air pressure in the tyre. I don't know if that's accurate. However, definitely as the air pressure comes down, so does the ground pressure. And last but not least, you're going to have a lot more puncture resistance with less air in the tyre. Okay, again, it comes down to that balloon theory. The more air in the balloon, the more easy it is to pop. Less air in the balloon, less easy it is to pop. Same thing applies to the tyres. Okay, so we'll wrap it up. Now, before we do pack up, I'll just discuss how I choose my tyre pressures. Now, bear in mind, I take into those considerations we first talked about back at the start of the video. Now, I always run, firstly, my front and rear tyre pressures equal, regardless of the load that's in the vehicle. Now, that's because it comes down to that ground pressure. Now, because I want my ground pressure to be equal front and rear, I run my tyre pressures equal front and rear, regardless of the load that's in them. The reason being for that, I know it's very common for people to run a higher PSI in the back of their vehicle, or they judge their PSI on making the footprint equal front and rear. But if you've got your equal footprint front and rear, and there's more weight on the rear of the vehicle, the ground pressure of the rear is going to be higher, and therefore more likely to dig into soft terrain and things like that. You'll still get plenty of grip, but you're going to reduce that flotation effect that you have. So I always run my tyres equal front and rear. I'm not saying you should do that. It's something you need to take into consideration with all those considerations at the start of the video and work out whether that can apply to you. But to me, that's how I do it. Now, if I'm driving around day to day, my go-to tyre pressure is about 35 psi. That's because I like a little bit of sort of suppleness in the tyres around the roads where I am, because the roads where I am are quite rough. Even the main roads are pretty garbage, to be frank. But there's also a lot of dirt roads and gravel roads where I am. So I run at 35 psi a day to day. However, if I want to do a big highway road move where I might spend 3-4 hours on the road going somewhere, what I'll do is I'll pump them up to about sort of 45 psi, and just to reduce that rolling resistance bit on the highway, and even increase fuel economy a little bit. Rough corrugations, and I mean proper rough corrugations, I will go out with a cold tyre pressure of 20 psi. Now, some people will say that's too low, but I've tested it and been very careful testing it. These tyres, these BFG KM3 3-ply tyre, they can absolutely handle the 20 psi with the weight that I've got in this vehicle. So I'll go out with a cold tyre pressure 20 psi, and it's especially handy on places like the PDR up the Cape York, where it's gravel and it's gravel bitumen, and I'll happily run up to 100 k's an hour at 20 psi, because when the tyres do warm up that little bit, they actually raise up to about 25 psi, and it just runs absolutely perfectly fine. I've stopped even in hot weather to check the temperature on the tyres. They're not too hot, they're not going to explode, they handle absolutely fine. But that's these tyres with this vehicle at those speeds. On sand, I pretty much these days just start at 10 psi, unless it's really hard packed sand, like Fraser Island for example. that'll be about 15 psi, but yeah, somewhere between 10 and 15 psi. Anything that's soft, remotely soft, 10 psi straight away. Okay, your tough bush tracks, somewhere between 15 and 18 psi. If it's something I really need some grip, yeah, 15 psi. But otherwise, I'll start about 18 psi and go from there. Okay, so that's pretty much it in regards to tyres. If you've got any questions, just put them in the comments down below. If you found it informative, do me a favour, click the like button. If you're enjoying the channel and the content so far, yeah, subscribe to the channel, ring that bell icon so you get notified for the next video. And yeah, so hope you enjoyed and thanks for watching. In the meantime, we'll get this thing aired back up and back on the road.